I'm just going to give a brief content warning before we start. I do get into some quite heavy stuff here. We're talking about mental health and well-being. I talk a little bit about depression. If any of you are feeling like it's too much, feel free to say in the chat and we can take a break. Or if you need to just leave, that's also fine. Like, I won't be offended. I completely understand. And as an aside, I am available on chat for the rest of the day, and my DMs are open on Twitter if you want to talk to me about any of the things that I cover in the talk today. But just to start, I shall introduce myself. So my name is Jo Franchetti, and I am a developer advocate at Ably, which is a platform that helps developers to build apps with real-time data. I mostly spend my time there writing tutorials and demos to try and make it easier for developers to get started on the platform. And I've been a web developer for 10 years now. I found out the other day, I got my Twitter anniversary saying it had been 10 years, and I know that I opened my first Twitter account in my first tech job, and I was like, oh, it's 10 years. But I've worked in many different sectors, from small startups to bigger organizations. I worked at charities, I've done agency work, I worked in the civil service for a while. I even tried to be self-employed for a while, but that didn't work out very well for me because I got too embarrassed asking people for money. And I'm also a coach and organizer at Codebar. And I guess what I'm trying to get across with all of this information is that I spend a lot of my time working with and talking to developers and designers and the people who work with them from all different seniority levels and from many different walks of life. And in doing so, I've started to notice some trends, and these are trends in behaviors, in beliefs, and complaints amongst people who work in the tech industry. And so I'd like to illustrate some of these to you with a story about a friend of mine. So let's call her Mo. And while I tell you about Mo, I'd like you to see if you recognize any of her behaviors in yourself. So Mo is a web developer, and she's got a few years of experience under her belt. She works on a team with other developers in a medium-sized organization. And Mo went to uni, mostly because her teachers told her that that's what you did next. But she feels like maybe she chose the wrong course. But at the time, she was too afraid to change course onto the one that she wanted. So instead, she graduated in a degree that she wasn't really interested in and decided to completely reskill. And she taught herself HTML and CSS with a view to becoming a web developer. But because she was self-taught, she's always had this sort of niggling worry and fear that her skills as a developer aren't as good as everybody else's. And sometimes she worries that she doesn't know the correct names or techniques for the code that she's writing. And she thinks that maybe she doesn't know as much as everybody else does. But she doesn't want to ask her colleagues for help in case she lets on all the things that she doesn't know. She's worried that they'll judge her. She imagines this look on their faces saying, "Why are you asking about that? You should know that. This is basic." So Mo tries to keep up with all of new web technologies by reading tutorials and attending meetups and events. But sometimes she feels like everyone else just gets the stuff that she's really struggling with. That there are people out there who are writing new and awesome frameworks and tools, while she's still struggling to learn the previous one. And sometimes she just feels like a fraud. And Mo follows a lot of web celebrities on various social media platforms to help her stay up to date. She's amazed at how much the speakers at the events that she's attending and the social media influencers that she's following are able to get done. It seems like they're creative geniuses. They never have to ask for help. They never get stuck. Their days just seem to have more hours than hers do. And they've all got side projects on the go. Mo's got a few ideas for side projects, but she doesn't know how to get started on some of them, and other ones she just can't seem to finish. And she's worried that people are going to judge them for being too unoriginal or too simple, so she never actually puts them in the public eye. She just keeps adding bits and tweaking them indefinitely. And if she's really honest, sometimes she just doesn't want to face a side project. She sits at her computer all day at work, and that's enough without then doing it in her spare time as well. And her worry about not keeping up with everyone and not being good enough starts to bother her throughout the workday. And sometimes she gets so worried that she can't concentrate on what she's doing. And then she worries that she's wasted time worrying. And so she works longer hours and she takes fewer and shorter breaks. But she still doesn't want to ask for help because that would give away her secret, the secret that she's a fraud. So in order to hide how worried she is about her own lack of knowledge, she starts attending even more events and joining web-related organizations. And people often tell her that they don't know how she manages to fit it all in, but she just smiles and shrugs off their comments because that means that her cover is working. And they'll never find out that she's a fraud. And Mo sometimes finds when she gets home from work or after an event that she's attended, she doesn't have the time or energy to deal with chores around the house or with seeing her friends. And her diet has become quite poor because she's eating pizza at these events or ordering takeout because she doesn't have time to cook in the evenings. And she's drinking far more than she used to because of all the events that she's attending where there's often a free bar. And even though she gets to bed late, she struggles to get to sleep at night because she can't seem to get her brain to switch off. It likes to switch between worrying about her workload and running lists of all the things that she hasn't managed to get done around the house. And her ability to concentrate at work continues to suffer. She procrastinates a lot instead of getting work done because she's so tired she just can't concentrate. She'll do email, she'll check social media, anything, you name it, to put off getting started because she's worried that when she does finally get started, her work might be judged by other people. And then she panics when she thinks that she's not got enough work done during the day. And her daily stand-up meetings become this dread every morning where she thinks that her team are going to wonder why she's being unproductive or that they're going to turn around and fire her. By the way, her team think that she's doing fine. They only ever see the output of her extra hours of work that she's putting in and not the hours of procrastination that came before it. And one day at work, Mo gets an email from a colleague saying that they found a mistake in some work that she made. And something inside her just kind of breaks. And she runs to the bathroom because she knows she's going to start crying and doesn't want anyone to see. And she cries uncontrollably for an hour. And when she's done, she cleans up her face and goes back to her desk and pretends that nothing happened. Everyone else on her team seems to be able to cope with their workload. They just tell her to buck up her ideas. And occasionally Mo can't face going into the office. So she calls in sick on those days, but never tells anyone that it's her mental health that's suffering and not her physical health. And Mo's mental health continues to suffer. She feels like there's a constant weight on her chest. She has heart palpitations during the day and frequently jolts awake during the night with her heart racing. And finally, Mo has a panic attack at work. Her breathing becomes sharp and shallow and her vision blurs, and she falls onto the floor under her desk, and she can't get up. She can't think straight. She finally manages to reach out a friend, sending a message saying, "I can't breathe." Thankfully for Mo, her friend was able to talk her back into calmness and helped her to realize that she needed to start facing her fears and her anxieties. She started therapy and she started learning about the causes of anxiety and stress. And she learned that the kind of mental health issues that she was facing, that's anxiety related to impostor syndrome and perfectionism, plague many people in the tech industry, but often we don't talk about them. And so if you recognize yourself in any of Mo's behavior, I'd like to talk you through some of it now. So I'd like to give you a short introduction to some of the issues that Mo was facing, along with some questions to ask yourself, some methods of recognition, and some self-care techniques so that you don't ever go through what she did. Because I truly believe that the tech industry is an amazing place to be. We're changing the face of so many walks of life, and our own mental health and well-being absolutely has to be one of them. So let's get started and talk about imposter syndrome. You might have heard it called imposter phenomenon or imposter experience. But imposter syndrome describes the feeling that you haven't earned any of your accomplishments, that by fraud or dumb luck, you've ended up in the same place as other people who you deem worthy, but you don't feel like you deserve to be there. And to call it a syndrome downplays how universal this feeling is. It's not a disease, It's not an abnormality, and it isn't necessarily tied to depression, anxiety, or self-esteem, but it is very prevalent in highly skilled, highly intelligent people, just like the kind of people who are attracted to working in the tech industry. So where do these feelings come from? People like yourselves who are skilled and intelligent tend to think that your colleagues and peers are also skilled and intelligent. And this can sometimes cause you to judge yourself against others and to do so unfairly and harshly. This judgment can cause you to believe that you don't deserve the opportunities, the qualifications, the accolades that you've earned, or that in some way the skills that you've gathered aren't worth as much as the skills of other people. And this can sometimes also be coupled with a belief that any qualifications that you have earned somehow aren't worthwhile anymore or aren't praiseworthy. Have you ever striven to achieve something only to feel like it came too easy, or that someone had made a mistake in awarding it to you, or that now that you've got it, it isn't enough and you have to start working towards the next thing and the next thing? Imposter syndrome doesn't let you feel pride or joy in any of your accomplishments. I will answer that question at the end, if that's okay. I do have an answer for it. But another problem with imposter syndrome is that our fears can be intensified by a phenomenon known as pluralistic ignorance. And this is where we doubt ourselves in private, but we never voice our doubts because we believe that we're alone in thinking that way because no one else is voicing their doubts either. No one else is talking about their fears. And this can be especially exacerbated by things like social media, where people tend to present only their best achievements and their successes. People rarely publish their mistakes, their self-doubts, or their own foibles. If Kim does run the failure swap shop later, I highly recommend going along and hearing all of the dumb things that developers have done, because it really helps you realize that everybody makes mistakes. But because people don't talk about it, it becomes really difficult to know how hard our peers are working, or how difficult they find certain tasks, or how often they get stuck or need help, or whether or not they ever doubt themselves. And this means that there's no easy way to dismiss this feeling that we're less capable than those around us. So with a view to sharing how prevalent this issue is, I'd like to share with you some famous and incredible people who have also suffered from imposter syndrome. So firstly, Maya Angelou, who even after writing 11 books and winning many, many awards, still felt like she hadn't earned her accomplishments. She said she felt like she'd run a game on everybody and they were going to find her out. The talented and seemingly confident Emma Watson feels like she doesn't deserve her achievements. She says, any moment someone's going to find out that I'm a total fraud. And if you can believe it, Albert Einstein also experienced imposter syndrome. He described himself as an involuntary swindler whose work didn't deserve as much attention as it had received. And talking with others about imposter syndrome is the best way to start recognizing these fears for what they are. They're normal, but they're immaterial and they're unfactual. Whenever I'm worrying that everyone around me knows more than me or that I don't belong, I like to think of this thing that I call Schrodinger's imposter syndrome. So this is the idea where I have convinced myself that all of my peers are far more intelligent and accomplished and brilliant than I am, stupid me down here, but yet also clever me has tricked my stupid colleagues into thinking that I belong amongst them. Now, these two statements can't exist alongside each other and both be true. My logic is fallible and therefore likely so is my disbelief in myself. And we may never be able to banish imposter experience entirely, but we can have open and frank conversations with our peers, with our managers, with the people that we're mentoring, and with our friends, and build confidence in the fact that many people feel this way. It doesn't mean that we have to give it any credit. So the second thing that I'd like to talk to you about is perfectionism. When I was preparing for my first ever tech interview, I was given a piece of advice that I'm sure many of you have also heard. And that was, if an interviewer ever asks you what your weaknesses are, just tell them you're a perfectionist. And this particular piece of advice was given to me and countless others by my boss in my job at the time. And it's the kind of statement that makes everyone rolls their eyes. Like, interviewees and interviewers alike know that it's a cop-out answer. The idea is you're not really revealing any weakness because employers want to hire perfectionists, because perfectionists do great work, right? They do the best work. They do perfect work. And it never occurred to me at the time, as I naively accepted this older and more experienced man's instruction, that I'd grow to learn the real truth behind this statement. So if you look it up, it says that perfectionism in psychology is a personality trait characterized by a person striving for flawlessness and setting high performance standards, accompanied by critical self-evaluations and concerns regarding others' evaluations. Which sounds great. If I were an employer, I'd want to hire someone who strives for flawlessness, who sets high standards and cares about others' evaluations. They sound like a real achiever. But perfectionism can often be a blocker to achievement. Imagine that you're constantly striving for perfection, not greatness, not excellence, actual perfection. You can't help but set yourself up to fail. Achieving perfection is not something that happens very often. And perfectionists measure our own self-worth by how able we are to achieve this perfection, by how much we can accomplish. And if accomplishments aren't attained, we can be really harsh on ourselves. The trouble is that for perfectionists, performance is intertwined with our sense of self. And when we don't succeed, we don't just feel disappointment in how we did, we feel shame about who we are. And perfectionists often engage in something called catastrophic or black and white thinking, where everything becomes either perfect or terrible. And even things that people would call great or good enough fall into the terrible category. An example could be fear of publishing a piece of work because someone might find an error in it. The idea of someone finding an error becomes this world-ending scenario where, their career is over, no one will ever speak to them again, everyone will shun them, rather than something that's manageable that they can work through if and when it happens. And I was diagnosed as a perfectionist a few years ago, and it was actually a relief to have a name to put to the stress that I was feeling. Every time I made a mistake or had a mental block on a piece of work, I spiraled into this depression and decision paralysis, which made my mental block worse and my disgust with myself greater. At one time, the anxiety that I felt over my own failure to create a perfect piece of work was so bad that it manifested into crippling neck pain, and the doctors had to put me on Valium to force me to relax and take some time out. And the problem is that the tech industry and capitalism and our society as a whole love it when we strive for perfection. They want us to be constantly building faster, better things, striving to be the most successful, to earn the most money, because then you can spend it on becoming even better. And tech employers often encourage this unhealthy belief that we should be constantly striving to work harder, to learn more, to create more. And we start to feel guilt when we're not working, and we shame ourselves out of taking breaks. We work on our sick days, and we answer email when we're on holiday or in the evenings. And perfectionist employees will pressure themselves into tiredness, into depression, into paralysis and burnout, all while probably continuing to hand in excellent work, never daring to ask for help, because that would be admitting that they can't be perfect. And much like those with impostor syndrome, perfectionists often disregard their own accomplishments because they're not enough. As soon as something that they were working towards is achieved, it's instantly disregarded because it can never bring that perfect feeling that they were hoping for. So they immediately start working towards the next thing and the next thing. And it's an unsustainable and unhappy way to be. And it can very quickly lead to overwork and to burning out. So if you're not sure whether you've had perfectionist tendencies, I'd like to ask you a few questions to consider. And firstly, this is the one that got me. Would you consider yourself a perfectionist? Now, when my therapist asked me this question, my response was, oh no, there's no way I'm good enough to be a perfectionist. And she just kind of stared at me. So if that was your answer, I'm afraid I've got some news for you. Have you ever felt like you can't start a project because you can't decide how to start? Sometimes figuring out the perfect way to start your project can be a blocker to even starting it. Have you ever found yourself repeatedly scrolling through social media or watching reruns on Netflix or even tidying your house when you knew you should be getting started on a project? Perfectionists have a tendency to procrastinate when we don't know how to start or finish a project. Not working on the project means that it can't be a failure because it's never going to be finished. And as I said, if you've ever left a project unfinished because you couldn't get it exactly how you wanted it, somehow the project feels not perfect in some way, so you just keep adding bits or tweaking bits, but you're not actually ready to show it to anybody yet or get anyone's opinion on it because they might think it's not perfect. Have you ever felt afraid or ashamed to ask for help from a colleague or peer because maybe that'll show that you don't know something or that you can't manage something and perfect people know everything? Better just to try that 1000th Google search than to turn to the person next to you and ask them for their help. So what can we do, both as perfectionists and friends of perfectionists, to make the tech industry a safer, kinder place to be? The first thing that you have to do is allow yourself time. Sometimes you just can't tackle a problem, but that's okay. It doesn't mean that you'll never be able to. It just means that you can't do it right now, right this second. So take a break, give yourself some time away, and don't let feelings of guilt or shame take over. Step away from the desk, try and remember to breathe, take an hour-long walk or even a whole day or two away from the problem. But then schedule in a start time for when you're going to try it again in future, once you're calm again, once your brain's had time to process it. When you're in that spiral of stress and brain block, you're never going to get it. Give yourself some time. Set deadlines and goals, targets, schedules, anything that will help you to break your work up into chunks, but make sure that they're realistic. Then either set them for yourself or ask someone else to help you set them. This idea of too much freedom can be stifling for perfectionists. We need something that we're aiming for and then can improve upon. Given a blank canvas, we will panic or procrastinate or start and abandon multiple projects because we can't decide what is the perfect way to start. So setting achievable goals will allow you to strive for excellence while removing the paralyzing nature of the open-ended task. And setting schedules and deadlines means that at some point you will be encouraged to start the work that you're procrastinating on, and indeed to finish the work that you're just tidying up those tiny niggles on. And try and remember that perfect is the enemy of great. Perfectionism isn't about high standards, it's about unrealistic, impossible standards. Getting something out is better than abandoning all of your hard work. And you'll likely be surprised that not only will no one else notice these imperfections that you thought were giant blockers, but they'll think that your work is brilliant. Try and remember that you are your own most harsh critic. Most people don't expect perfectionism from other people. Perfectionists only think that they do. No one is going to judge you as harshly as you judge yourself. It's okay to make mistakes. Everybody does it. It's even okay to release imperfect code. It's even okay if somebody finds a mistake in your code. You can thank them, you will learn something new, you will fix the mistake, and you will both move on with your lives and the world will not end. It's easy to start putting yourself down when you don't meet your own unachievable expectations, but consider how you'd react if someone said the things that you're thinking about yourself to one of your friends or colleagues. And try and think your fears through to their logical conclusion. Instead of the catastrophic or black and white thinking, like if I made a mistake in front of my colleagues, that would be the end of everything. Consider what the end of everything would actually look like. Do the Dr. Pepper test. What is the worst that could happen? Consider the possible outcomes of your fear and then be honest with yourself about how likely that scenario actually is. Then you can start to consider how such an event would actually play out and how bad or not it would be. So if we take our example from earlier, where you've released a piece of code, someone has found a mistake in it. The worst possible outcome, they not only find the mistake, they email it to the CEO. The CEO is so horrified that you made this mistake that he publishes a whole blog post about what a terrible developer you are. Your entire career is ruined. You will never get another job again. You're going to lose your home. How likely is that? Is it more likely that your colleague will find the mistake and say, oh, hey, I found that mistake. Can you fix it when you've got time? Trying to work your fears through to their logical conclusion will save you hours and hours of this whirlwind of worry that you can get your head into. And the more I've spoken about my experiences with perfectionism, the more people have told me that they have had similar problems. And in fact, many of you have said so in the chat. And with the tendency for intelligence and achievement in tech industry employees, it's perhaps unsurprising that so many people suffer from perfectionism. But the more we talk about these issues, the less stigma we will feel around dealing with them and about helping others through them. We can validate our own and each other's experiences. It's okay to say, yeah, actually working in the tech industry is hard sometimes. And the more open and communicative we are about mental health in the tech industry, the more pleasant a working experience we can create for everyone. So the final issue that I'd like to talk to you about and that I'd like you to watch for in yourselves is anxiety. And anxiety is an entirely natural and normal feeling. Worrying about a new experience or a deadline or a scary situation is completely normal and understandable. But anxiety becomes a problem if you're feeling it generally or over a long period of time. And there's a theory that says that we learn anxiety as babies. When we're tiny and helpless, we rely on being lovable enough for someone else to give us everything that we need. But for some of us, that need to be loved and accepted and worry that we're not good enough to be loved never goes away. And we constantly need reassurance that we're doing okay. And in the last few years, we've been given some very powerful tools for checking whether or not we're doing well in comparison to everybody else. Of course, I'm talking about Facebook, Instagram, any kind of social media. And it gives us instant validation on our decisions and our life choices. Posting on social media gives us a means of representing the lives that we want and to get validation in the forms of likes and comments. But we can't help comparing this fake life that we're sharing with the fake lives that other people are sharing and these beautiful idealized illustrations, which can constantly stoke our fear that we're doing less well than others. But both imposter syndrome and perfectionism can be causes of anxiety and can impact on your mental well-being. And record numbers of people are experiencing poor mental health, according to the World Health Organization. Depression, anxiety, and suicide ideation are more common in the UK now than they were a decade ago. And a good prediction of depression is self-criticism, which perfectionists and those with imposter syndrome are really good at. Worsening matters, being self-critical not only leads to depressive symptoms, but those symptoms can then make your self-criticism worse, and it's a horrible loop. It's also been shown that one of the best protections against anxiety and depression is self-compassion, which is the very thing that perfectionists are not so good at. So how can we improve our self-compassion and our self-care? Because truly it does take practice and patience. So the first thing that I would ask you to do is to change where you look for validation. We're used to the external signs of success. When we're younger, we get praise from our parents and our teachers. We take exams, we get grades. And sometimes when we move on to a job and a career, we start feeling the need for that validation, but we can't come by it as easily. So we start looking in unhealthy places for indications of whether we're succeeding. We want our bosses to tell us that we've done a good job. We want to be on the highest salary that we can. We crave our next Twitter or Instagram like. And these are all what we call external validation. And the problem with external validation is that it's fleeting. 1 or 2 likes on social media can give you a little buzz. It can feel good. And a pay rise feels great. But the thing is, the feeling soon wears off and you're back to feeling insecure. What we want to try is self-validation, which is accepting your own experiences, your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions. It's knowing within yourself that you're enough and that you don't have to perform for others. It's accepting good enough instead of perfect, because good enough really actually is good enough. And learning self-validation will allow you to calm yourself when you're feeling anxiety or panic. And being calmer will allow you to catch and manage that internal mean voice more effectively. So how do we learn to self-validate? So firstly, instead of resolving to change your behavior instantly, firstly, just learn to recognize it. So when you find yourself engaging in negative thoughts about yourself or in procrastination, or maybe even checking your work Slack out of hours, or whatever behavior it is that you're concerned about, firstly, just acknowledge it and consider it. And once you've reached a point where you can notice yourself engaging in a bad habit, then you can start considering reasoning with yourself over it and reflect on why you're doing it. If you're feeling insecure, consider whether it's really you or whether it's a societal pressure that's making you feel that way. If you find yourself procrastinating, let yourself have some time, but schedule in a start time in an hour or so. And if you're checking your work email at midnight, check it, close it, put the phone down. Don't berate yourself for it. Just acknowledge it, accept that it happened, consider it, reflect on what might be behind the issue and where that thought has come from, and think how you can manage it in the future. And speaking of reflection, if you have trouble getting to sleep at night, it might be because you've not spent enough time reflecting on your day and your experiences. I don't know about you, but I quite often have that thing where, my head has finally hit the pillow at the end of the day and my brain goes, oh, hey, remember that embarrassing thing that you did 2 years ago? Let's just go through that in graphic detail. And you're just lying there sweating. So you can avoid that by spending some downtime either before bed or whenever is best for you, just thinking about your day and how it went and how you feel about it. No phones, no screens, just you and your thoughts. And try to consider only the facts of the day and don't make assumptions. So I got this bug fixed today and I feel really good about it. Or I haven't done that thing on my list and it's making me feel anxious. Or my friend cancelled on me for lunch today and I'm pissed off about that. Those are all valid thoughts. I didn't do that thing on my list today because I'm a failure and I'm no good at anything is an assumption and not a fact. And if you catch yourself doing that, try and consider where that thought might have come from. Are you being driven by a need for perfection? Are you believing the stories of capitalism or, dare I say it, the patriarchy? Accepting the facts of your experience will help you to build trust in your own internal validation and will help you to catch the bad habits quicker. And if you need help managing your procrastination, consider using a work timing technique such as Pomodoro or similar, where you have allotted time for concentration and for breaks. There are a whole load of apps out there that are available on various app stores to help you try this out. And if you have a tendency to work too many hours, try and cut down even in half-an-hour increments and see whether or not you notice any difference in how efficient you're being. If you're applying for jobs, don't be afraid to ask probing questions about how they support their employees to have good mental health and find out whether they're even comfortable talking about it. chances are if they can't talk about mental health in an interview, they're not going to be able to support you when you need it down the line. Make sure that you schedule in clear time for work and clear time for rest. That way you can't make yourself feel guilty about the fact that you're not working. And you also know when you should be checking those emails or that Slack and when you shouldn't. Again, apps can really help us here. Both Apple and Android have work mode and not work mode, where you can make certain apps go grayscale or not, depending on what time of day it is. And allow your friends to help you through catastrophic thinking. The number of times that I've been stuck in this sort of whirlwind loop, thinking everything is a disaster, only to talk it through with a friend and have them say, and then what? After I've described my panic scenario where, I think the world is going to end and I'm going to get fired. When they say, and then what? I'm like, oh, and then I'll probably just go back into work the next day. Sometimes you need that extra nudge to remember that the end times are not going to come. But find the things that work best for you and give them a chance. And be truthful with yourself about what is and isn't working. And finally, try and get in touch with what helps you feel calm when you're anxious or overtired or just needing a bit of me time. For some people, it's a walk. For some, it's listening to music or meditation or taking a bubble bath. I like to take a walk and go and get a bubble tea. But it has to be able to come from you and not from somebody else. It should be things that reduce your blood pressure rather than raise it. So I'm afraid posting to Twitter doesn't count. That's getting external validation. Texting your crush also doesn't count. Eating a kilo of chocolate or drinking 3 cups of coffee probably don't count either, I'm afraid. Self-soothing is things that you have to be able to do for yourself to give yourself time to feel validated and calm and happy. And why am I telling you these things? Because I never want anyone else to go through what I did. If you haven't already guessed, most story was my story. I don't want anyone to feel alone or unsupported, because I really think that by talking about it, we can increase awareness and learning about mental health in the tech industry. Because the tech industry can be a wonderful, empowering, and brilliant place to be, and because we all deserve to be there. Thank you for listening. So that was a lot. We have some questions. Do I have time? When is this slot supposed to finish? 8:20. Okay, I've got 5 minutes. Okay, there was some questions earlier. How would you differentiate what is imposter syndrome and what is genuinely being the most junior person in your team and knowing you have a lot to learn? So we all always have a lot to learn, but imposter syndrome is when you turn around and tell yourself that you don't belong because you're stupid, or you don't belong because you're a fraud. We are never not learning. Everybody has things to learn, and your team should also be supporting you in telling you that it's fine and that you're allowed to have gaps in your knowledge and you're allowed to still be needing to train yourself up. Like that should absolutely be allowed and should absolutely be supported by your team. So the first thing that I would say is have a listen to that internal voice, and if it's saying to you, we're never going to learn all of this because we're rubbish, that's sounding like imposter syndrome. If it's saying, oh my gosh, there's so much to learn, then maybe that's a concern that you need to talk about with your colleagues and say, like, I'm having these worries. I'm worried I'm not keeping up. I'm worried I'm not learning enough stuff. Can we maybe set out a schedule for the things that I have to learn? And your team should be really supportive in this. When you hire a junior, you absolutely do not expect them to know everything and expect them to be leaning on the rest of the team a lot. So do not feel bad about that. Did I miss another question? I'm always congratulating the effort that my staff put in. That can't be a bad thing. Is this for working overtime, or is this for putting in hard work within hours? One thing that my team is very good at is if we do end up working overtime, we make sure that whoever it was who worked overtime takes the time later, because burnout is a very real thing. And we all want to do super well, and we all want to, you know, do the best that we can. And especially earlier on in our careers, we have a tendency to just push and push and push and push and push. And we're like, I'm doing so well, I'm getting all this work done. And then, you know, 5 years down the line, we're like, and I can't cope anymore. And I'm drinking 50 coffees a day and having a nervous breakdown. So you've got to make sure that, as well as congratulating them for doing excellent work, you're congratulating them for taking a break and looking after themselves. Where is the line between looking for external validation and needing reassurance / encouragement? That's a difficult one. I think I'm not even sure if I know how to answer that. If anybody else has a good answer for that. I guess it depends on how much you're needing it. If you're doing something that you're not sure about and you need a bit of reassurance that you're doing the right thing, that's okay. I think if you constantly feel the need that you need to have every single choice that you make validated, that's when you're in dangerous waters. Or if you find yourself scrolling through social media, for example, you know, looking for that next little hit of happiness because it's someone who's agreed with you or someone who's liked one of your posts, that's when you're getting into dangerous territory. If you're able to feel comfortable with the majority of your decisions and the majority of the actions that you're taking, I think that's a safe place to be. If anyone has anything that they would like to add or share anything that has affected them, like, it would be lovely to chat to you all too. Feel free to jump in.
Hello. I thought I'd just dive in and say, crunch is really bad. Like having done it, it entirely wrecked me. So I worked like 10+ hour days, or I don't know, like a couple of months probably. Maybe a month or so, and like any overtime is a zero-sum game eventually. I did it, and I was wrecked for like 6 months, like no motivation, like all the things you're talking about. Like, don't do it. It's fine in very small bursts, but you have to know that you pay the price. It's like going out drinking. Like, don't get up at 6 a.m. It's going to suck.
Yeah.
Also, I've been doing this for 10 years and I still get imposter syndrome, so it never goes away.
It never does, but at least all of us talking about it helps us all to know that it is just it's just a stupid thing, and we can just ignore it and, you know, move on with our days.
Yeah, I mentioned this earlier, but like engineering, I think is amazing for the fact that you can do it multiple times in a day. Like, you'll fix a problem and you're a genius, and then 30 seconds later you're an idiot because you've done it wrong, and then you're fine again, and then it's lunchtime. It's wild, like, you know.
It is an emotional roller coaster, which is another toll on like your general tiredness and ability to stop, you know, and continue to problem solve. With the big takeaway I would like everybody to take away from this is just be nice to yourselves. Mike says, what to do when perfectionism leads to underperformance at work? Talk to your colleagues, and as colleagues of people who are perfectionists, talk to them about the fact that they are clearly in a spiral. And if you find yourself often in a spiral, talk to your colleagues, to your managers about it, and say, like, this is a thing that happens to me. It looks like this. I start to act in this way. When I do this, please tell me to take a break. Take me for a walk, or, you know, just take me for a cup of tea or whatever, and just give me 5 minutes away from my desk, and then I will be able to process through it. Having somebody else who can notice this in you really, really helps if you can't notice it in yourself. And the final thing that I will say before we disappear, if you can afford it, or if you can get it on the NHS, get therapy. Everybody in the whole world should have talking therapy. It's amazing for working through a whole load of these issues and starting to recognize these behaviors in yourself. Thank you all for listening.